get the obvious point out of the way first. Dungeons & Dragons is phenomenal. But the experience can differ wildly depending on whether you're a player or a dungeon master. Players adventure around the imaginary world, slaying beasts, causing chaos, and probably setting quite a few things on fire. Everything that happens around them happens thanks to the dungeon master. Effectively playing the role of God during any Dungeons & Dragons campaign, dungeon masters run the game itself. Since Dungeons & Dragons' birth in the 1970s, for half a century these storytellers have been whipping up characters out of thin air and making players feel as if they really are strolling through a dryad-infested forest, or sneaking through a fiendishly tricky dungeon, or having the spark of life drained from them as they fail their third death save. Being a dungeon master is a stressful, magical, unpredictable, exhilarating experience. There's few things quite like it, as the entire vibe of the campaign depends on you, and how you encourage/goad your players into the adventure you've planned for them. To help you dungeon masters out, we travelled to the Lucca Comics and Games Festival in Italy and got some hot dungeon master tips from some Dungeons & Dragons professional players. So here's 9 dungeon master tips to help you run the Dungeons & Dragons campaign of your dreams. Or nightmares, if you truly want to put your players through hell.
You know, as a DM, like, you gotta do your homework. You gotta prep. I mean, you can't be intimidated by doing some work, because that's what being a DM is. You have to prep, you have to prepare, you gotta be ready for them to do anything, because your players will inevitably do the complete opposite of whatever you plan. And so you gotta be ready to pull stuff out of your ass too.
Oh wow, there is so many good starter modules out there, so don't be afraid if you don't build like this massive, 20-year arc for the characters. You can just start with, some creepy critters on a farm and have your people introduced there.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be too complicated to start with.
There are a lot of fantastic pre-written adventures by Wizards of the Coast, the guys that make Dungeons & Dragons, that you can buy and check out. Things like the Essentials Kit, which is the new starter set for the game, comes with a really good breakdown, a series of different little smaller missions that you can kind of string together to be more like a sandbox campaign. So if you're familiar with stuff like Skyrim, you can play it more in that way where you have a town, there are different quests, and you can go and find and talk to people, and that might unlock other little things that you can do.
A passing familiarity with the rules is helpful, at a bare minimum. You want to be familiar enough with it so you can ignore it selectively.
I kind of grew up between two really good DMs, and one of the DMs was like, rules, and here's the adventure. I guess I was kind of on the outskirts. The other DM we had was a little more loose. And the way I ended up DMing was just, I'm crazy when I DM. It's just like, whatever you're gonna do, I have some notes, go do stuff. So I think it's sort of finding which one of those is your comfort zone. Again, none of those are wrong. It's just how you do it. The first time I tried to DM like the sort of mathy DM. It was terrible. It was probably the most horrible D&D game ever ran. Because I was like, no, you can't go left, you have to go right. It was very railroady. Like I made every mistake you could make. So I think it's finding out, like a lot of D&D, you find out who you are by doing it. So you find out, well, I actually really enjoy doing it this way. So do it the way that you enjoy doing it.
And you don't need to know all the rules either. You can write down the core rules, little cheat sheet. And then if you can't figure it out, just say, I need a second, we're gonna figure it out, see what happens. And I think if you have a party that's aware of that, you can just advance the story that way. So don't make it too complicated, don't go on these massive tangents yet, just keep it nice and simple.
I think keep it playful. There's a sweet spot between taking it way too seriously and being just, the rules absolutely say that doesn't quite work that way, so no. I'm like, be fluid. give yourself a couple of voices to have in your back pocket. So if you need an NPC to have a voice, they can be recognizable. And that helps the players build a relationship with the NPC because they have an identity.
Well, I think the best thing a DM can do is make characters. Pick a character class and a race, and go make that character by yourself. I think the more you understand the process of character building and the process of spells and gaining advantage by mixing certain spells or looking at combat in a preparatory way, I think that's going to help tremendously. If you understand the characters, you understand the mechanics of each one and how they operate, and what gives a character balance versus another character. That's the one thing that I think Dungeons & Dragons does better than any of the other tabletop games is, for the most part, the classes and races are pretty well balanced. I mean, there's a couple that you could argue are a bit OP, but there's enough that are OP that levels out to a bit. So I think understanding those mechanics are going to help.
It's good to sometimes plan stuff earlier on. Give them bits of info or a character, or like as if it's this whole different scene, like you're not there, but somewhere in a tower there's a wizard and he's doing this or that. Like, give them bits of that they can use later on and realize, hey, that was this one thing. Yeah. So
yeah, trying to tie make like separate little mini stories and then tie them together. That creates a feeling of a overarching campaign that's there. Maybe you haven't planned it out because it's impossible to plan where people are going. So people can stick, you expect them to go wander outside of town and then they'll stay in the inn for hours. So it's like, you gotta find out these little micro stories and attach them together and then feed them little bits.
I would say that one of the best things you can do is just consume media. Read books, play video games, watch movies, because that's where you're going to draw your inspirations from.
It's important for you to have fun too, and working out what's fun for you as a DM is, I think, a really important thing. I think of it as a collaborative storytelling exercise.
The best thing a DM can do, I think, is playing other people's games, because you're just going to learn mechanics, you're going to learn rules.
Everyone has a tendency to like sort of get in a rut, like this is how I do it. So you have to push yourself to try different things so that you can surprise people. Because entertaining people, I think, is about surprising them. Like, what's happening? And if you become predictable, then you'll become like a TV show that's too serial. You'll become too predictable. So you have to remember to keep your players sort of like surprised.
The handiest tip for DMs is like don't get too precious about your story. Like it's not a novel. You don't get to like write it out. Have an outline, know broadly where you want to go, and then be prepared for the party to do whatever the hell they want, and completely upend like the magnificent, Game of Thronesian story arc that you've tried to put together. And if they're enjoying it, go with it. It's their story. You're helping them tell it, and if they're having fun and it's not negatively impacting the other people in the group or you, just roll with it.
Always, for every session you have, prepare one extra little combat that you don't think you're ever going to need to use. So when your players go off and do the thing you weren't expecting, you've got a thing that is mechanically statted up and ready to go. But even though you've written it down, it's a bunch of guards, you can always be like, oh no, they're orcs. Or they're a bunch of big wasps with swords. Or you can paint whatever they are, whatever you want them to be over the stats, but just have done the maths ahead of time.
And then the other thing I would say is, and this is a classic technique for improvisation, is learn to say yes and. Try and avoid saying no but. Whenever you say no in something in D&D, it's you might have to do it because of the rules, but generally if a player wants to do something awesome, say yes and this is how you're going to do it, or yes but this happens, or yes and you can do this as well, because that will just make the game feel more fluid and it will make it feel more fun.
D&D and improv are fundamentally the same thing. The only difference is in D&D, every now and then one of the dice goes no. 1. no. At which point you get to then, you still improvise, but you improvise a negative thing.
In general, being a DM is about being a fan of the players. So if your players have got a cool thing, they've written this cool thing about their character, it's about relishing in that, and it's about giving them opportunities to shine, it's about giving them opportunities to be awesome, to feel powerful, but also to exploit their weaknesses and their flaws and make it feel like a real game. Because that's one of the wonders of D&D, is that you can do anything, you're not limited, and you can make it a very personal thing with your friends.
A good DM will always maybe work something out with you, so you could have that cool story moment, like maybe your character makes a noble sacrifice. If you want to go completely scorched earth and start a new character, yeah, you could do something like, I want to make a noble sacrifice.
One of my favorite tricks is, if you happen to have somebody in your party that is growing tired of their character, you can actually sort of decide that that character is part of the evil crew and was a spy all along.
Yes.
So create a little bit of a surprise.
There's a sweet spot between having a mix between being playful and engaging with your players and what they want to have, what they want to try, and really joining in with them, but also presenting them with challenges that need them to think about it and work together to overcome, because that way they get victories. You've got to let them earn a victory, otherwise it doesn't matter.
It's as you build those friendships and that story and all that kind of stuff, you get the next level. When you start getting that reaction where it's like, this is the next episode of the TV series that I'm addicted to, that you've kind of got there.
So, there you go. 9 Dungeon Master tips that should help you out if this is your first or 991st session you're running. Hit like if you found these tips helpful, and subscribe to Eurogamer for more Dungeons & Dragons videos, plus plenty more about video games. We release a new video every single day, so there's always something to watch. We'll see you next time, and may the dice be ever in your favour.